Hello everyone and welcome back to the Silent Defender. In this video, we are going to build something real. Imagine this. You have a file with multiple hashes and you want to check if they are malicious. Instead of checking one by one manually, we will automate everything using Python. We will take this as an input and generate this as an output, all using Python plus APIs. So let's understand this simply. So API is a way for your code to talk to another service. Think of it like a waiter in restaurant. You don't go into the kitchen, you send a request. Here, in this case, we send a request to a service called VirusTotal, which takes an input of hash and tells us how many security vendors have marked it as malicious. For example, if you open your browser and search for VirusTotal, you can search for any hash, and here you can see that out of 70 security vendors, 26 have flagged that this is a malicious hash or this is a malicious file, which in this case is exela.exe. Now, before we move ahead, let's create a separate branch for our tutorial. Let's just check. So we are in main branch and we will check out to let's name it API. And now you can confirm that we are in API branch and it is clean. So let's create a separate directory by the name of http requests and API. And in this, let's create a file tutorial.py and we are good to go. So in Python, we use request. So if we import requests, so this library helps us to send HTTP request and get their responses. Let's take this step by step and start writing our code. So let's write our code for one hash value and then we will modify it for the list of hash values. So in this case, we need to query the VirusTotal and get the response. So we provide VirusTotal a hash value and we get the response on how many vendors have flagged this as malicious. So that is our task. So first we need the URL or the API endpoint which we need to hit to get this information. So we can go to VirusTotal API documentation for reference. So if we search for VirusTotal API reference, you will find this API version 3, and on the left hand side you can look for files and then get a file report. So here you can retrieve information about a file. All you need to pass is a hash value of the file. So this is the API endpoint. So we can copy this URL. So we can name a variable by the name of URL, and inside this, let's pass this. Now this ID is the hash value. So for the sake of this tutorial, let's take a hash value and let's use the one that we checked on VirusTotal, this one. Although we did not need the variable, we can directly put this So we have the URL ready with us. So this is the URL, VirusTotal API version 3 files and then the file hash. Now if you have noticed on the API documentation page, it also requires some headers. Here, X API key, and on the right hand side you can see accept application JSON. So VirusTotal requires an API key to authenticate. We will cover this part later. So as of now, let's define our headers variable. So we will write headers. Let's remove this since we don't need it as of now. So we will write headers is equal to, and this will be a dictionary, and we need a X API key, and as a placeholder, let's just keep it API key as of now. And the second header value was accept and application JSON. Perfect. So now our URL and header variables are ready. What more do we need? Nothing. We have done it. Now we can use the inbuilt functions. So we can use requests.get to retrieve the data. So how do we use it? We can write something like our request is equal to requests.get. Here we pass the URL and here we pass the headers. So headers is equal to headers. And now if we just print our request dot status code, we can check what is the status code of this request, and also we can print our request.json. So whatever output we received from this, the .json will convert into a clean dictionary. But for this code to work, we need an API key. So let's go ahead and get one API key. So we will go to VirusTotal and let me sign out from here, and we will create a new account. And once you are inside, you can click on your profile and click on API key. Now please note that this is highly confidential and hence we should never hard code API keys in our code. It is a security risk and it can leak credentials. So how do we use this API key directly in our code without exposing any credentials or without any security risk? So for this, we use a .env file. This is a simple file but hidden, which we will use to store our credentials. Now instead of writing passwords directly into our source code, we store them in the .env file and reference them through variables. Benefit: this file will never leave our system even if we push our code to GitHub. By adding the .env file to our .gitignore file, you ensure that sensitive data is never uploaded to public repositories like GitHub. Let's understand that. So here in this directory, we will create a new file by the name of .gitignore, and inside that we will type .env and save this. So our gitignore is ready. So now when we push our data, Git will ignore .env files and won't push them. So now let's create our .env file. Let's name it .env, and inside this let's use VT API key, and in this you can enter your API key and save the file and close this. Now in our main code, what we need to do is we can do that API key, the variable which we are using for API key. This API key is equal to os.getEnv and the variable that we used in our env file, which was VT API key. What it does, it takes that value of that variable and stores it inside the API key, which makes our code secure. But for this to work, we need to import certain things. First, we need to import OS, and then from .env, we need to import load.env. And also we have to run this function. So this is it. Now we can run our code and see the output. Perfect. So here you can see it's difficult to read, but the status code is 200 and the response we have is in dictionary. So I can just help you out here, and the important things that we are trying to look here is, so inside our request variable and JSON, this dictionary, we want to look at the data key, inside that attributes key, and inside that last analysis statistics. And so if you run this, you can see the malicious score. We have one more dictionary inside this. So it is a malicious score of 26 and suspicious, undetected, harmless, and all those. But the most important value we have here is that the malicious score is 26, which, as we saw in our, okay, we lost that page, but which we saw previously was the same value, 26. So excellent. Now we have run our code and got the desired output. Now let's create a CSV file which contains our demo hashes. So we will go to this and create a new, let's say hashes.csv. And inside this, let's paste some mock hashes and save this file. So now let's first read the CSV file which contains this list of hashes. So as you know, we need to import CSV here, and inside our code, let's start writing here with open and copy the relative path, paste it here, escape this. We only want to do a read mode, and let's do it as F, and data is equal to csv.dict reader, and let's pass the F. So now if you do for row in data and print row, let's see what the output is. To avoid it being executed, let's comment it out. And yeah, print row. Okay, so we made a mistake here. This was the column name. So we'll go back again, and inside this, let's name the first row as hashes and save it again. Let's make it hash, save it and run it again. So now you can see hash this value, and then we have all 5 hashes. Now let's save that in a list. So let's create a list by the name of hashes, initiate it as blank, and instead of printing it here, what we can do is we can do hashes dot append, and we want to do row of hash. And now if you do that and print the hashes variable later, you can see we are getting a list which contains all the hashes. So our step 1 is done. Let's remove the print statement. So now for every hash value, we have to query the VirusTotal and write the output to the new CSV. Let's start with the first step. So we have all the hashes inside this variable. So we can do something like for x in hashes, and then let's uncomment this. We will have URL is equal to this, and we can remove this section and the string, add a plus and concatenate it with x. So now our URL is this API endpoint plus the hash value for x inside the loop. For headers, they will stay the same for all the executions, so we can put them outside this loop. Now our URL and header is ready. So we can go ahead and do the request. So we can do our request is equal to requests.get headers is equal to header. So as you saw, there was a status code which actually tells what was the status of the API request, whether it succeeded or whether it failed. So we can do something like if our request dot status code is not equal to 200, then we can do print, and let's say an f string, there is an error, status code, and let's put this status code here. So it basically says that if it is not 200, there is an error, and if it is 200, it means that our execution was successful. So we can write a pass statement as of now. So now to store the data, let's create a new variable by the name of final data, and let's initialize it as an empty list. So now what all do we need? For every execution, let's create a temp dictionary, which is an empty dictionary. And we know that the temp of hash will be X. So the first key will be hash, and the first value will be the hash value for our first dictionary, for our first item in this dictionary. The next value we want is the score. And as we saw previously, we can get it using this. And at the end of this, we can add malicious, and it will get us the reputation score of that particular hash value. So this is also done. Now also let's pass verdict on this score. So what we can do is that if the temp of score 0, then we can say that our verdict is, let's say, safe. And elif, if it is less than equal to 2, then let's give the verdict as suspicious. Although it's not the best practice, but let's do it like this. If it is less than equal to 5, let's do it malicious. And at the end, if it is greater than 5, then we can just have it as highly malicious. And so here we have, so inside the temp, we have hash key, hash value, a score key, which contains the reputation score. And depending on the count of that score, we have a verdict key, which contains safe, suspicious, malicious, or highly malicious. And at the end of this loop, which ends here, we can do our final data dot append, and let's append this temporary dictionary. Now our code looks perfect, but there is a catch. There is a limit on the number of hits you can make to VirusTotal API within a minute on free version, and the limit is 4. So if we run the above code, we have 5 hash values. So we will encounter an error highlighting that we have exceeded our quota per minute. So what we need to do is to avoid doing all these executions at the same time and put some time interval. Hence comes the time.sleep function. So what we can do is we can import time, and after every loop execution, we can do time.sleep and let it sleep for 20 seconds. Now every run will be delayed by 20 seconds, which will give us sufficient time and our API limit will not be breached. Now to end this code, we can create a new file inside the same path, which is this one. Let's name it output.csv. We want it in write mode, and we want to do new line as blank, as as file. We want to declare a writer variable, which will do csv.dictWriter. The data where to write is file, and the field name would be the ones that we declared, which was hash. In the temporary variable, it was hash, it was score, and it was verdict. Now, like we did in our last videos, we will do writer dot write header and writer dot write rows, and in write rows we can reference our final data which we have. Now let's run it and cross our fingers. Now it will take some time to execute. I think it will take around 100 seconds. So I'll pause the video and return back once we have an output. Okay, so the execution is complete. Just one thing to note here, that I wrote field name here, which throw an error. So I have fixed it with field names. And other than that, we don't have any error. So let's go and check our output file. So here you can see we have a hash score verdict, and let's open it in CSV. It will be good to read. Yeah, so as you can see, so we have a hash values, we have a score 26, 68, 48, 40, 41, and then the verdict. So our script works fine. So we can go ahead and push our code after saving our file. So let's do a git status real quick. And let's do a git add. So here you can see we are pushing 4 files, although we created 5 files. That is, our .env is not getting pushed since we already added it into the git ignore. So we can go ahead with git commit -m and tutorial for API and HTTP requests, git push, set upstream origin, and let's name it API. It was API. And let's create a pull request. Merge it, create merge commit, and delete branch. And do a git pull. We are in the main branch and the status is clean. So now just to verify, we can open GitHub, and which one is it? Python for cybersecurity automation. Yes. And inside this, we are working on HTTP request API. So here you can see, if you open the tutorial.py, the API key is not there and you can't find it anywhere. So it is safe locally on our systems. So now you're not just writing scripts, you're interacting with real world security platforms. Like, share, and subscribe to secure your feed, and I'll see you in the next one. Keep defending.